Welcome to Kitchen Chat. This is where we sample the talents of the most notorious chefs, home cooks, foodies, and celebrities that sizzle. Get ready for a culinary journey that you won't find anywhere else. Here's the host of Kitchen Chat, Margaret McSweeney.
Hello, dear foodie friends, and welcome to Kitchen Chat. This is your host, Margaret McSweeney. I'm so glad you're joining me today as we continue this exciting journey. Well, today you are going to meet again one of my very, very dear friends, Sandra Gutierrez. She is so accomplished. She is an author of several books. Also, she has a permanent exhibit in the Smithsonian Museum. Well, more about that. And she has a new cookbook called Latinissimo. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
And we are going to take a journey with her, dear foodie friends, through 21 countries across Latin America, taste and celebrate the food and the differences, the similarities of all of the different dishes. So welcome to Kitchen Chat. And Sandra, welcome.
Thank you, my dear Margaret. It's wonderful to be talking to you again.
Oh, it's so great to be here with you. So much to catch up on. Let's just kind of set the table for our friends who are listening and watching today. We met many years ago through IACP, International Association of Culinary Professionals, and we were in Washington, D.C., I believe at that point. It was celebrating Chef Jacques Pepin's 80th birthday.
That's right.
And also going on these wonderful excursions. And how many people can say that we met a very dear friend in the White House garden on our garden tour? That was so special. And we knew immediately we would be lifelong friends. Well, you have been very busy, Sandra. You actually have this fabulous new book, and I'm going to, of course, have a link to this on the website and social media. But you have become known as the Julia Child of Latin American cuisine.
Oh, my goodness.
How did this journey begin?
Well, this is the book that I've had in my heart for 30 years. This is the book I've always wanted to write. But when I first brought the idea to my agent, over a decade ago, she said, this is the book you're going to write, but they're not ready for it yet. So let's do other things. So I wrote 4 other books in the meantime, all these years going by, but I was just blessed. It's one of these, serendipitous things that happen, God's hand definitely in making this happen. The proposal was out and a few publishing houses wanted the book. And so we were talking about perhaps going into auction, which is where they, vie for the proposal, the proposal, among publishing houses. But my editor at Knopf, who now is my editor, told my agent, he said, if she's willing to talk to us first, let's see if we can get to an agreement before you go on the other direction. And who can say no to Knopf, It's like, forget it. Yes, absolutely. So we did. We actually made an arrangement very quickly, and they signed up for the book. And Tom, his name is Tom Pold, and he had the vision to allow me to work with my ideas and the heart of the book so that we could put together a book that represented exactly what we wanted to give the public, which is a cookbook of Latin American recipes that are for the home cook from a home cook. So they're not difficult recipes. They're very easy to make, but they are all super traditional, and they've been made for many, many years. People still make it today, but it's the equivalent of what modern home cooks are doing in Latin America today that their contemporaries here can make. And they have the same, restraints of time and ingredients. And so the ingredients are super easy to find. Recipes are not long to make. The steps and techniques are so easy that you really do not need to take new classes to to cook Latin food. And he had the vision to let me go that way in direction and build the book that way. And this book, I always say it's from both of our hearts to the world, because you need an editor who really understands the mission of the book and who doesn't want to change what you wanted to, your idea. Because after all, you're the expert, right? You're the one that's got this baby in your mind. And he didn't change it. He just helped me shape it. And I owe it to him. So I think the greatest, kudos to Tom, and also to Sally Eckes, who's my agent and who said to me for many years, just hold on, we're going to make this happen. But you don't have to just write any book. You will write the book that you want to write. So let's work at getting you this book. It was worth it.
Well, this is like the book from your heart, the gift from your heart. And I love the parallel similarities between you and Julia Child. I remember the excerpt from the movie Julie and Julia, where she and her husband could not pronounce Knopf. On the porch, I remember that scene. And here you are working with a special editor there, just as Julia Child worked with hers and brought French cuisine to the home chefs of America. And you are bringing Latin American cuisine to the home chefs of America here in the United States. I love that. So let's, if you could, set the stage, set the table for us. I love in the opening, you talk about how Latin American cuisine is almost like a house. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
I look at Latin American cuisine because we're all tied in the same territory. So if you look at Mexico as being the first country after the United States, the one that starts Latin American cuisine, and it is the neighbor to America. So therefore, it is the cuisine that most people are familiar with. So I see in this house that Mexico is the front door. But once you open that front door, you walk in and there are 20 other kitchens full of food, vibrancy, great flavors, amazing ingredients that are just as exciting as Mexican cuisine is. It's just that they haven't been discovered yet because they're not the first neighbor of the U.S. And so that's what I say. I say, walk in through the door of Mexican cuisine, with your knowledge of tacos and enchiladas and burritos and all the food that you know. And as you keep discovering the intricacies of Mexican regional cuisine, because it's so vast and so amazing, keep on walking into the other kitchens also, and you will find the same history, the same kind of vibrancy, the same kind of developmental characteristics of the cuisines with their own regionalities and their own special angles that each country has to offer. And each one of those countries is completely different, but they meet in the middle of the hallway through all the ingredients that they share in common.
I love that analogy. So if we could step into the kitchen of your childhood, and that is in Guatemala, tell us about the kitchen. What are your childhood taste memories, and are any of them included in this book?
They are actually my very first taste memories. I grew up with a mom who didn't cook. She went to university. So we had a cook, we had a housekeeper, but my grandmother cooked. And my grandmother was, I call her the Martha Stewart of the 40s and 50s and 60s in Guatemala, because everybody who was anybody would show up in her house on the weekends. You never knew how many people were going to be there. It could be 8, it could be 40, it could be, 200. You never know. And so she was always ready to adapt and to fix whatever she needed to do with food from her garden, from her farm, everything. She lived in a big estate with animals and the whole thing in order to feed whoever was there. But I was very, very shy. And so I was made to go in, as every Latin American child is. You go into the big hall or wherever the people are meeting, and you have to say hello to everybody, and shake hands or kiss somebody's cheek or whatever. And you say hello to every single person. And then you can go and play. But it would mortify me. So I would say hello to everybody, and then I would run to the kitchen. It was like I was spent. I didn't want to see any more people. And her staff, early on, I was 5, 6 years old, told me, you can only hide in here if you help us. And so I started cooking many of these dishes when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. My first task in her kitchen was cleaning beans, making sure they didn't bring any pebbles or any stones or any, grass, anything that was there. And then I moved up to learning to make sauces. And then they taught me early on, I was probably 6 years old, how to make miniature tortillas because I had to pat them by hand and my hands were tiny. So I would make the small ones that they would use for appetizers.
Aww.
And so the memories of my life have always been in relation to the kitchen. I've always found it to be a safe place for me to be. Mm-hmm. My grandmother also taught me to research about different cuisines. This was before internet, before computers, even before electric typewriters. I'm aging myself, but she would say, we're having guests from India. So go through the encyclopedias and the cookbooks that I have in my library and find out what the people from this area in India would eat and would cook and what things they don't touch. And we will create a menu based on that. So I learned to research and I found a fascination on learning history about food and about people through my grandmother's, socializing, needs. And that just changed me. I think it shaped who I am. I love to research. I love to talk to people. Now I'm not afraid to go in and say hello to hundreds of people. But my favorite place is as a person who has cooked a meal and people are eating it. There's nothing that makes me happier than that. And Guatemala's kitchen was really a place where you had bubbling pots of beans, which is what most people expect, except ours were black beans. Yes, we do have tamales, but ours are wrapped in banana leaves and they're made with special sauces. But we also have incredible stews called pepianes, which are made with a mixture of tomatoes and green tomatoes or tomatillos and chiles, of course, which are native to the Central American area, and nuts. And so you make these delicious sauces. Some have beef, some are made with chicken, some are made with all three, chicken, pork, and beef in the same pot, and lots of vegetables. So that's another thing that we have in common. And then we have the Mayan tradition of the moles or sauces like guacamole. In Guatemala, it's not called guacamole. It's called guacamole because it's a Mayan word versus the guacamole coming from the Nahuatl word from the Aztec. So we do have our variances, which is why I was saying in a house of Latin American cuisines, we tend to meet in the middle in a huge hallway where we all have these ingredients in common, but we cook them in different ways. We prepare them in different ways. Neighboring kitchens will have one or two similar dishes that sort of happen in the doorway of each kitchen, where the two countries and their physical boundaries literally intersect. But each country is completely different than the next. And so even though people who know Mexico would have a very easy time eating Guatemalan food because that is the first country that follows. And so they can find some connection there. And the further away they move from Mexico, the more different the food is.
Wow. And let's talk about that. First of all, I love your memories of your Guatemalan kitchen. And I should add to your accolades that you are indeed a culinary historian, and you are credited with finding another foodway within the United States. And that was the influence of the Latin American cuisine. So congratulations.
Thank you. That was the new Southern Latino movement, the influence of Latin American foodways in the food of the regional south of the U.S.
That is so amazing. So you talk about adjoining countries, and you have in this cookbook 21 different countries within Latin America. What was the most surprising ingredient, preparation of these common items that you find in the kitchen in all Latin American kitchens? But what was the most surprising that you found in terms of what they made and how they made it?
I think for me, and that's why it's on the cover, the most important ingredient and the one that still surprises me when I see the different ways in which it is used in the kitchen is corn. Corn, of course, is an ingredient of the Americas, maize, the original maize, not the hybridized corn varieties that we eat, corn on the cob here that are sweet, which are just delicious. I love them too. But the corn that the Mayans and Aztecs first domesticated, and domestication is what you call when people make a food edible that wasn't edible before. It was starchier. It's more similar to your flint corn. So the uses are different. The sizes are different. The colors are, oh my goodness, there's so many colors of corn: blue, purple, red, gemstone colors with all the colors of the rainbow, in one single cob. It's amazing.
Wow.
But the uses are different. And that impressed me. There are countries in Latin America where corn is used for sweet things. So you will find sweet corn puddings, sweet corn ice cream, things like that. But in other countries, it is nixtamalized, which is when you add calcium hydroxide to the corn and you let it soak overnight so that the outer hull will separate. That is what makes corn that is not hybridized edible. It's what makes niacin, what helps niacin to be absorbed in the body so people don't get sick. And the Mayans and the Aztecs have been doing this for centuries. And what you get, that is in the United States, nixtamalized corn is called hominy. So it is an ingredient that the Native Americans, hominy grit. And in Mexico and Latin America, it is then processed into masa, which is what you use to make tortillas, but it's exactly the same ingredient. It's just how different it's used, right? And then, so that's where you make your tortillas, your tamales, your pupusas. And you have all those ingredients combined in different ways. But then when you go into South America, that nixtamal is now called mote. It's a different word. It's now the Quechua people in South America, and the word is mote, and it's the same corn. But instead of making masa out of it, they actually just cook it after nixtamalizing it, and they eat it, for example, they eat it with scrambled eggs in the morning. Or they eat it with sugar and milk as oatmeal or cereal. You cannot recognize one dish from the other. It's incredible, but it's the same ingredient.
It's the same. And how do you spell the note?
Mote. It's M as in mother.
Yes.
O, T as in Tom, E. Mote. And you will find several of those recipes in the corn chapter of my book. And then, of course, not every Latin American eats tortillas. Once you move into South America, the tortilla, as most people think of it, a flatbread made with nixtamalized corn, disappears. And what you find there are arepas, which are similar to hoe cakes. So they're still made with nixtamalized corn, but it's a completely different texture. The procedure is different, in which the dough is prepared. And what it results in is in flatbreads that are not pliable like tortillas. They're a little denser. So the thick ones, the ones that are fried, in Venezuela, for instance, or griddled in butter, those have exteriors that are crispy and crunchy, but once you bite in the middle, it tastes like grits. It tastes like polenta.
Wow.
So that was an incredible ingredient. And every one of the ingredients that I picked was surprising. It had surprises like that too, because depending on what cultures melded in each country, after the colonization, particularly in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, where people from around the world started emigrating and making homes in different numbers in different countries, that's when the cuisines really took another turn. And that is why you will find a lot of British influences in Argentina, but you'll also find Italian influences in Argentinian cuisine. But you will find a lot of, for instance, Lebanese cultural influences in foodways in both the Dominican Republic and Brazil, for example. Or you will find a lot of Chinese influences in Peru and in some of the coastal towns of Latin America. So it depends how you see history and how these people came and settled in different numbers in different countries, how the cuisines were shaped. So in many ways, I say Latin America has the real melting pot. It's not the U.S. anymore, because here in the U.S., we're trying to separate all the ingredients. Somebody's trying to put carrots away from the potatoes, away from the fish, away from the soy sauce or whatever, In Latin America, the fusion, if you will, the blending of cultures didn't happen with chefs trying to cook them together. It happened organically by people coming together. And in Latin America, when it was colonized by both the Spaniards and the Portuguese, which was happening before the British entered the United States. But Portuguese and Spaniards, who were also coming to America to spread Christianity, found that if they allowed races and people to mix, it was much easier to govern them and much easier to teach them because they were not constantly fighting with each other. While in the US, the British, and wherever the British landed, believed that any mestizaje or joining of two different races, they saw it as impure blood. They didn't see it as somebody who was of pure caste. So that was not encouraged. Well, we did in Latin America. So in Latin America, you don't have huge racism, for instance. It's a place where you will find blonde, blue-eyed Guatemalans eating next to a Mayan Guatemalan eating next to a Japanese-looking Peruvian, and so on and so forth.
Oh, a true melting pot indeed, and a delicious one at that. I would love to look at some recipes. Do you have any from Brazil in here?
Yes, I have several from Brazil. I do. And again, I chose some that are pretty simple to make at home. One of them, of course, the most famous dish in Brazil is the feijoada. And that's a dried feijoada with beans and every part of the pork possible. But to make a real feijoada takes a long time. And I happen to have a wonderful neighbor from Brazil whose children came to knock on my door during COVID and said, we're bringing you some of our own homemade feijoada. And it's their everyday feijoada that they make with very simple ingredients. And I included that in the book, their recipe. And it's beautiful. It's called the feijoada do Janini. Feijoada todo dia do Janini. Janini is her name. Then I also included sweets, the famous brigadeiros from Brazil, which are the condensed milk candy, a mixture between a truffle and a toffee is what I call it. But the one that I chose for the book is the one made with coconut. So these are the white ones, because traditionally they're made with chocolate. These are just as amazing. I also included moqueca, which is their fish and coconut milk stew. And I included a delicious dish that has chicken, and then it has dried shrimp powder. So there are many, many recipes from each country. I think every country got at least 26 recipes included in the book, because I wanted to represent each one.
Yes. And that is
homemade dishes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if a lot of my listeners do this, but I lived in Brazil. I lived in Rio de Janeiro during graduate school days, and saudade do Brasil, as they say. I miss Brazil so much. And it was such an eye-opening experience that was my first time immersed in a new culture and the food of the new culture. And I remember the churrascarias where they bring meat to the table. I'm wondering where that came from. Was that brought from Portugal? I wonder where, that experience originated.
It's interesting because when the Spaniards descended in what is today the Dominican Republic, which they call La Española, that's what they call it, they found that the Taíno Indians, who were the Native Americans from that area, indigenous people there, were already cooking meat on sticks directly over fire. And they were calling it barbacoa.
Amazing.
Which is where the term barbacoa comes from. And so the technique was definitely indigenous to the peoples of the Americas. And then it spread. And how it spread, the most plausible story, because you never have the ultimate proof of it, but the most plausible story is that the African American enslaved people who were forced to come and work here after all of the indigenous people were massacred, not only because of wars and exploitation, but mostly because of germs like smallpox, so we also have to say things as they were. But when the African enslaved people came here, they were the ones who were in charge of cooking most of the foods, just like they were in the American South. And so because races were able to mix, slavery actually started getting dispelled sooner in Latin America and throughout Latin America in different places than it did in the US. And as the African Latinos or the Afro-Latino movement started shaping the cuisines of all of the countries in Latin America, barbacoa started traveling with them.
Wow.
And it's very interesting because they are the ones that have continued the tradition of barbecue even within the United States.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love this history, and you have come up with the roots of following everything through. It's amazing. And the taste in Brazil, the feijoada, I remember every Saturday they'd have the feijoada and feijoão. And it was,
and your collard greens that were cooked very, very simply, those are there too, the couvé. And you have okra and tomatoes, stews, I included a lot of Brazilian recipes in the book.
Oh, this is great. I can't wait to dive into that. What is another country of all these 21? I mean, I wish we had time to go through a recipe. But you can get the book, dear foodie friends. I'll have the link. But what is another country that surprised you with such a vibrant dish that you absolutely love?
I think one of the most exciting cuisines in Latin America is Peruvian food. Because again of the mix of peoples that settled in the territory. So you have the Incas with the use of tomatoes and potatoes, which are actually native of Peru. And then you have the Spaniards, who are the ones who colonized. But then you also have a lot of Middle Easterns, Africans, and Chinese and Japanese. And so you can only imagine, and there are more cultures, but those are like the ones that made the huge impact in the cuisine and left indelible marks. You can imagine that combination of flavors. So for instance, one of the traditional, and it is in the book, one of the traditional stir fries of Peru, it's their national dish called lomo saltado, which simply means stir-fried beef. It's made like a Chinese stir fry. It has soy sauce. It has oyster sauce, but then it has vinegar, which is a very Spanish addition to a dish, which of course you would never find in Chinese food unless it's wine vinegar. And then they have tomatoes added to it, which you will not find in a Chinese traditional stir fry. And they finish the dish with fried potatoes on top, and they serve that over rice. Peruvians will have rice, which is a very Asian ingredient that was not here in the Americas before it was colonized. And they serve it almost always next to some kind of potato. So you have that double starch in foods. But Peruvian cuisine has a lot of surprising recipes. There's a recipe that I love from Peru. I always laugh at the nuance, or the belief that one pot pastas began in 1990, with the first person who started publishing, where you just put all the ingredients in a pot and the pasta cooks with the sauce and everything in it. But we've been making pasta like that. We call them sopas secas in Latin America for 2 centuries. And this one is particularly delicious from Peru. And it is a pasta that you start by sauteing some achiote oil, which is the orange oil made with annatto, which is the ingredient that makes cheddar cheese orange. So you've all been eating it, even though you don't know it, right? So everybody's had it. You cannot be afraid of annatto. That's why I made a whole chapter on it. And you make an oil with it, and then you start sauteing your aromatics, your onion, your garlic, whatnot. And then you add your pasta, still hard, uncooked, into it, and you saute it, and you start adding sauce there. And the sauce is a mixture of broth and basil. And you start adding this incredible sauce and cooking the pasta a little bit at a time, stirring it like you would a risotto. And at the end, you end up with this dish where the pasta cooked, absorbing absolutely all the flavors from the oil on to the last part. And it tastes amazing. And Mexicans also have a version of sopas secas. Almost every country has one.
Yes.
Colombia, for instance, is famous. Well, any part that had, again, the African influence in them are famous for rice that is toasted in the bottom. Just like socarrat also happens in paella, that they have that crusty in the bottom. So you find different versions of what they call concolon or raspao, and it is just simple rice that's been cooked and then allowed to get crispy and crunchy in the bottom of the pot. Wow. Remind you perhaps of tadig, which is Persian. It's the price of getting that crunchy golden bottom of the pot in rice. And etc. I can talk about all these recipes all day. There's so many. I cannot find even 10 favorite because I just love testing them all and researching them all. That I cannot tell you. Maybe the most important recipes for me personally are the ones that remind me of my grandmother. But I think that for whoever is reading this, it's whatever recipe reminds them of something that they are comforted by.
Yes. There are hundreds of recipes in this book.
Yes.
Latinissimo. Did I say that correctly?
Latinissimo, yes. Which means very Latin.
Yes, I love this. And you will get to either virtually, or I encourage you to actually travel to these countries to get a taste across Latin America. But it shows us truly, we gather around the table and the ingredients, there are all these common ingredients, the common denominator. Food truly unites us, and you have made the world smaller through these connections. And I know that we both are on this journey and continue to honor our fathers through this journey. What was the best advice that you most treasure from your dad that you can share?
My dad believed in excellence. My dad said, it doesn't matter what you do, whatever it is that you decide to do in life, it doesn't matter. But do it right and do it with excellence, because that's the only way you're going to set yourself aside from others. Excellence matters. So he said, whether you own a gas station or whether you are a doctor, be the best that you can be.
I love that. Excellence matters. And you have captured the essence of excellence. And Latinissimo, your new cookbook, we'll make sure we have links, dear foodie friends. And I have to mention, too, we're both part of Les Dames d'Escoffier. You helped introduce me to this wonderful organization. And there's so many additional accolades I could share about Sandra Gutierrez. And I'll make sure your bio is on the blog. But as a friend, as a fellow culinarian, one who cannot really cook, but one can communicate about the cooking and all the great things that you are doing. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being on Kitchen Chat. Thanks for being such a very dear friend. And congratulations on your new cookbook.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for being on this journey with me for so many years. You and I both walking together and giving each other support as we find new paths with our careers.
Yes.
And thank you for sharing this with the public. I am very, very, very grateful to you. And you know I love you.
Oh, I love you. And we'll have to schedule another champagne and cheeseburger.
Yes. For your listeners, that is our celebratory lunch every time we see each other every few years, is a hamburger or cheeseburger and a little glass of champagne.
Absolutely. Well, here is toasting you today on your great accomplishments and the wonderful person that you are. Please, your foodie friends, check out Sandra, I want to say Sandra Latinista, because that's Instagram. And what is your website that you can share with everyone?
The easiest way to find me is through Sandra Latinista. The website is part of Penguin Random House. So it's Penguin Random House, Sandra Gutierrez.
Oh, perfect.
But if they just look for me on Penguin Random House, they'll find the website.
Perfect. And I'll provide some links too on the blog. But thank you. And thank you, dear foodie friends, for joining us today. And always remember to take a moment and savor the day.